Meta NPCs will change your D&D game forever, delight your players, and leave them more immersed in your world than ever before. But what are they? It's hard to get our players interested and invested in our NPCs. Most of the time it's because our characters are just not interesting or believable enough. But I've stumbled on a proven method through many, many years, hundreds of sessions, thousands of in-game hours of trial and error, trying to make my NPCs the best they can be. And I'm not only going to share with you the fruits of my labor, but I'm also going to tell you the secrets of why this is the best way to make your NPCs, and I'm going to give you some actionable steps that you can take right now to improve your NPC game. So stick around to the end of the video to find out how. Welcome, storytellers. I am Holistic Dungeon Master, and I help DMs master their craft. If you're enjoying my content so far, then please like the video, crit the subscribe button and notification bell to see more videos about how to improve your DM craft. Now let's get rolling! My NPCs used to be pretty flat and pretty shallow. Sure, I had a knack for improvising interesting, wacky, and dramatic characters in-game, but they never really felt like real people. So I started to experiment with a bunch of different tips and tricks to make them seem more real. That started to work. Honestly, they did. You can check out one of the most impactful ones right there. Go ahead, pause this video, check that one, come back here and finish this video. Don't leave it hanging. The algorithm will slay my channel. Slay it dead. Slay it dead like your party slays a goblin. Dead. Poor defenseless little goblin. Poor defenseless little channel. And these little tips and tricks did work, but something was missing. I very much stumbled upon this method by accident and didn't realize the absolute gold mine that I had stumbled upon until one particular NPC interaction my party had left them stunned and speechless in silence until one of them broke it by saying, "Wow, I just want to say that that is some seriously cool backstory for this guy." As in, like, they broke character, broke the immersion of the game to tell me that. It felt really good. It felt really nice as a dungeon master, right? I tried to understand why, why was that so effective about that particular interaction? Why did they care so much about this NPC? All I did was flesh out some improvised tidbit about this NPC's backstory from another game. There it was. There it was. It all suddenly became very clear. It wasn't the interaction. It was the NPC. It just happened to be one of my favorite NPCs that I recycle in almost every game I run because he's just a blast of roleplay. I love him to death. Zelvin Zalfir, Cavalier Merchant, extraordinaire. But something subtle was happening every time I did so. And that special in-game moment that stunned my players happened because of it. Let me explain. In each game, this NPC's backstory developed just a little bit more each time. So, to my mind, no matter what game he was in, he had just one story that spanned multiple games instead of a different story for each one. He had developed a meta backstory. He had become a meta NPC. So that special moment that stunned my players didn't just happen because of one well-improvised moment. It happened because each time they encountered this NPC, he seemed incredibly real because I had unknowingly developed deep lore, mannerisms, and idiosyncrasies for him. And because he seemed more real, they cared about him more, and their immersion was deep whenever they talked to him because of this. And it deepened even further every time they did so. And that immersion is what set my players up for that beautiful moment. It set them up to care about some heart-rending tidbit from this character's history. You can see, I'm sure, because you're all very, very clever, how this hits a little bit different than learning some sad moment about the local blacksmith's story who your party don't have that much of a deep connection to. Especially because I had previously come up with that tidbit in a different game for this character, so I had this sort of base level from which to improvise further. Having that base makes improv so much easier than pulling something from nowhere. The moment wouldn't have been as meaningful if I hadn't had that base. But alrighty, I can hear the keyboards a clickety-clacking already as some of you type something like, but why not just flesh out important NPCs and their stories from the very beginning? Well, I have a very, very good reason for that. But you'll just have to wait till later in the video to find out. But before we get to that, I have to explain to you why this method is so effective. By the way, a huge shout out to my Patreon subscribers. You guys are really helping to keep this channel going. We're getting just that much closer to being able to afford better equipment to upgrade the production values of this channel, like the lights, like the camera. It's all in the pipeline. If you are interested in helping the channel get to these heightened levels, then please consider subscribing to my Patreon in the description down below. So why does this work so well? Why don't you tell me? Take a moment, pause the video, type down in the comments why you think this might be so effective or not. Add your voice to this meta discussion we're having about the craft so we can all learn something from one another. Done? Alrighty, the real ones, you know who you are. You actually took the time to do this, so I really appreciate that. Thank you. Getting back on track though, there's a simple reason that this method hits so good. Well, there's two actually. One, it lets us think about our NPC actions in a multitude of different and sometimes wildly different contexts. Two, it gives our ideas about them space to breathe and develop over time. Let's start with that first one. Each group is different. Each game can be vastly different in tone, scope, power levels, genre, etc, etc, etc. So we get to plonk our NPCs into each of these different contexts and see, kind of learn how they'll react. By doing this, we really have to think about what we already know about our NPCs, personalities, goals, ideals, etc, and we get to flesh them out. Each party we present them to will test our character in different ways. What happens then is that we get a very solid idea about who this NPC is through repeated testing of their traits. Like, we'll have to improvise around whatever situations our players put them in. For example, if they are friendly and helpful to one party in one game, what happens when they encounter another party, but from an indifferent or even antagonistic angle? It forces us to make those decisions, and those decisions are what give our NPC depth, real depth. But what about the second reason? Well, by throwing our NPC into multiple games and many different scenarios, it's inevitable that we'll have to improvise some stuff around them depending on how our party interacts with them, what questions they ask, what situations what kind of trouble they get them in, right? How they treat them, etc, etc. So we'll gather our little tidbits, hoard them like a little goblin hoarding a bunch of gems and gold, right? And since we're using them in a different game, these tidbits, these little seedling ideas we have for our NPC story will have time to develop in our minds. And by the time we plop them down into another game, these ideas will have been chewed on by our minds, and yes, even our subconscious, so that the next time another party meets them, we will just be so much more prepared to dive deeper into that idea and improvise around it from that baseline. What this does is supercharge our NPC's development into a believable and fleshed out character by having them gain some backstory and testing of their personality in different situations, rather than just have it happening in one game, in one campaign. Because that's slower and more kind of limited in scope of situations that they can be developed by. Our players are going to pick up on this depth and these nuances in our NPCs, and more real NPCs, more believable NPCs. It just increases, it just boosts that nectar of the tabletop RPG gods for our players. Say it with me now. Immersion. But hold on, just a second. I promised you all something, didn't I, at the start of the video, my wonderful and loyal viewers and subscribers? Subscribers? No, seriously though, I know a lot of you watch and don't subscribe. Please do it, please. It really helps out me and the channel. But I promised you all that I'd explain why doing it this way is better than simply fleshing out our NPCs in exquisite detail beforehand. And I will deliver. I've explained how using meta NPCs supercharges their character development and lore, but there's a much more elegant reason why this way is, in my opinion, a huge improvement over sitting down for a few hours and writing our NPC in enormous detail. It saves us prep time and it allows for organic character growth. I mean, think about it. How many NPCs? There's gonna be a bunch of important recurring ones in your campaign. How many of those can you realistically find the time out of your busy lives and busy days to write out everything you'll need to know about them before campaign even starts? How many hours will that take away from all of that other stuff we really should be putting the hours into preparing, like well-built dynamic encounters or threading character backstories into the main narrative? Why not let it all happen in-game? Why not start with a basic idea instead for an NPC and fast track their development through this method? Why not let each party's decisions and interactions with this NPC influence how this NPC develops? This is a much less kind of rigid way to do things, and it also lets your party feel as though they're involved in this NPC's life much more. That collaborative storytelling we're trying to do here at the table. We don't really know the needs and wants of our party before we spend a good few sessions in game with them. We don't know what they love, what they hate, what they love to hate. So by doing this, we can wait until we have learned all of that stuff and kind of mold our NPCs around that. It's a much more interesting way to write NPC lore, and it's also so much more fun for us, you and me as dungeon masters. I put a lot of emphasis on player enjoyment in order to get the most satisfaction as a dungeon master, but there's a couple of ways we can make it feel really good for us too, and this is one of them, because we don't know what our NPCs are going to turn out like until we improvise some aspect of them and flesh it out, if it's a good idea, of course. And what better joy is there when running tabletop RPGs than being surprised as the dungeon master, game master, whatever. I mean, you know, as the ones who design the adventures and tell the stories, blah 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 blah. It happens so precious little that we are surprised in game that we should kind of nurture and love those opportunities as much as possible. And that way, everyone at the table is sharing these little surprises together. So how can you take some action right now, today, to start developing your own meta NPCs to delight your players with? I'm gonna show you. Step 1, write a basic NPC from scratch. Merely craft a description, an occupation, personality, some ideals and goals for them. Nothing too complicated, don't go into too much details. Keep it simple. Step 2, drop them into at least 2 games you're running to supercharge their development. If you don't have 2 games to do this, then jump into the wonderful HDM community Discord server and ask either me or one of the other many wonderful GMs in there to ask you some questions about your NPC in order for you to flesh them out. Step 3, anytime you improvise another tidbit about them and you really like that idea, write it down somewhere. Keep a live document for your meta NPC so that you can keep track of their ever developing story and personality. Step 4, use the tidbit in a game you didn't improvise it in and build upon it. Improvise around it in that other game. Step 5, relish in your players' delight and increased immersion as they begin to feel how much depth there is to your NPCs and thus your world. Step 6, share your experience in the comments below or in the Discord server so again we can all just learn from each other and help each other hone our craft. If you've watched this video up until now, then you are the DM that I make these videos for, someone who is truly dedicated to being the best dungeon master they can be. So thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Please like the video, share it with another DM who needs deeper NPCs for their players and games, crit the subscribe button and notification bell, and remember, this world needs good DMs.